So, last time we had learned that Hezekiah, king, was done. He'd heard that the Assyrian king had died, a new one was in his place, and he was hopeful that this one would be weak, that this one would stay where they were, and he'd be able to fight against them, and he wouldn't have to pay tribute money. The royal treasuries were becoming more and more empty. People were needing more supplies than Hezekiah could give. And King Hezekiah was worried and knew that it might be time. He really thought it might be time to fight back. And so he got ready. He didn't know that Sennacherib, the new king of Assyria, was worse than ever. So here we are. As Hezekiah met with his advisors, they were quite excited to hear that he wanted to break free. They'd been advising this for years. Only Isaiah had been against them. Well, prophet Isaiah was still against this. But Hezekiah wasn't listening anymore. He was sure this was the right way, that it was time to be king and to support his people, and that this time of uncertainty for Assyria could be their one window, their one chance to break free from their rule. So he got together with his leaders and they made a plan. Hezekiah sent messengers out to the surrounding smaller kingdoms asking if they would support, telling them of this plan to stop sending tribute money and to form alliances with the kingdoms all around. Prophet Isaiah kept advising against it, saying it is never okay to form alliances with pagan kingdoms that don't worship Yahweh, to put their trust in their neighbors instead of in God. Hezekiah didn't listen, and messengers went out. And one by one, messenger after messenger came back. And nearby smaller kingdom after nearby smaller kingdom was happy to join on. The kingdom of Judah was one of the strongest and the richest in the area. And if Judah would finally stand up for Assyria, then so could they, and they could do it all together. And maybe as a group, they could win their freedom. But one day a message came back. One group from Philistia would not join. They refused. They decided to stay with Assyria. Well, as Hezekiah looked at maps and looked at cities, he looked at his own cities and knew he had to strengthen the ones to the north. There was one particular city in the north. It had been where his father's royal retreat was, and it guarded the entrance to the nation. It had to be the most carefully guarded. Hezekiah had the walls checked, and yes, they were the thickest of all. No battering ram could splinter them. Its supplies were good, its people were safe. Everywhere was safe, except this area of Philistia. If they wouldn't join in, there was no hope. The Assyrians could come into the kingdom through there, and nobody could stop them. And so Hezekiah made a decision. He met with the advisors, and they decided together he would have to attack Philistia. He'd have to attack the Philistines and make them swear loyalty to Judah against Assyria. Troops got ready, training happened, supplies got gathered. Through all of this, the citadel, the tunnels for the water were being dug still. And the grain was being rotated so that fresh grain was always there and they could fill the coffers in case Assyria attacked. But finally came the day they were ready to attack the Philistines. Out marched the troops, and out marched Hezekiah with them across the countryside towards the city of Ekron. They arrived and the battle was on. This was Hezekiah's first battle as king. He'd been king over 20 years, but under the peace under Assyria, they'd had to pay the price for peace, but he'd never had the chance to prove himself as a leader in battle. He made the opening call, "Charge!" And soon there was a clash of metal and swords and arrows flying and horses neighing. All of it, the sounds of battle were everywhere. Generals were running back and forth, the Hezekiah sending their messengers back and forth, asking where they should attack. Around the sides went one group, through the middle went another, around the sides went another, back and forth. They would surge forward and pull back, and surge forward and pull back. Hezekiah was on a hill watching this happen in the valley outside the city of Ekron. This battle was going back and forth, and it didn't take too long to realize Judah was going to win. The fighting was happening, and soldiers were thrusting swords and arrows were flying, but soon it was clear they were going to surrender. As he watched, just as he was having those thoughts, a white flag flew. They had surrendered. Hezekiah's troops had won. Hezekiah couldn't believe it. His people loved him, but now he'd proven his worth as a warrior. He overtook the city. It was an amazing fight. It was beautiful. He felt so good. His soldiers had won. And the city of Ekron and the area of the Philistines swore loyalty to Judah. Hezekiah set up some leaders there to help advise and make sure they maintained their loyalty. And he marched home with his troops. There were trumpets going. It was like a parade as they saw the city of Jerusalem and marched into it. They marched through the big open gates, and there was celebrating and partying and music and songs and dancing. Long live the king! Long live the king! Came the shouts from the streets. Again, the people felt they could trust Hezekiah. He felt so good about his decision to form an alliance with all the neighboring nations and finally be free from the tyranny of Assyria. It was late in the night when Hezekiah finally went back to his palace and to bed. When he got there, somebody was waiting for him. Somebody who wasn't as happy with what had happened. The prophet Isaiah. Isaiah saw Hezekiah came in and he looked sad. And Hezekiah said, "Before you even start, you should have seen it. Oh, the troops did so well. The battle was so quick. I know this is Yahweh's sign." Isaiah shook his head and he said, "How many times have I advised you against relying on these fickle pagan kingdoms? Beating the Philistines is nothing. They're just a little skirmish compared to the might of Assyria that will come down on you for this. You have stopped paying tribute money and you've formed a rebellion. Do you not know what that means? What they're going to send down here? They're not just going to ignore that. They are going to attack, and you are not ready for this. And the pagan kingdoms will turn on you and will instantly go back to offering tribute to Assyria just to keep the peace. You can't keep these kingdoms together." Hezekiah said, "No, I don't believe it. They will join together. We all want freedom from Assyria. We will be a strong alliance. You will see." Isaiah said, "No, you didn't trust in Yahweh. You're trusting in the might of other kingdoms. This will end badly." Hezekiah shook his head and he said, "I had to make this decision. My people trust me to be king. The finances of the kingdom were at stake. I couldn't provide for their needs anymore. Overtaking the Philistines had refilled our coffers. I can now afford to provide for my people again. And we will join together with these other kingdoms and we will be successful against Assyria." And you'll have to wait till next time to hear more. Okay, guys, it was so great getting to tell the story again. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next time. Say your prayers with your teachers, and I look forward to seeing you again in person soon. Bye.